I feel like no matter the discussions I have with people, they tend to forget that I want to explore the middle pretty much at all times. Honestly, it frustrates me. If I may let out some bottled up anxiety and frustration, and if I may just be unfiltered with my thoughts, I just can't understand why people don't seem to have the capability of going into a conversation in an absorbent way. Every word and phrasing is painted with such immediate negative connotation, no matter the person in front of them. Also, if my potential criticism or just general challenging of your ideals harbors such a short fuse, then are your thoughts and ideals as staunch and strong as your initial determination seems to allude to? Like, if someone challenges what I think is right or good, I have the arguments to back it up. And if my ideals fall flat through these challenges, then it might be time for me to either aim to change them or to figure how to bolster them. So, this was an excerpt from my captain's log, or journal, if you will, certainly not diary, of some of my frustrations I've been having in somewhat recent times. And I wanted to talk about it. So, I don't know how wise it is for me to share my, for the most part, uncensored thoughts onto the entirety of the internet, especially sharing these things with a lot of people that I know and who, to an extent, are not necessarily targeted but affected by this problem I've been having, let's say. Just to give a bit more context on this specific topic, for let's say maybe the last 3 to 4 years, I've been struggling to feel understood and struggling to effectively communicate with a lot of my circle. And it's brought me to really dark places, but I always ask myself, how did it get to this point? And I do try my hardest to, in the most of my capabilities, seen as objective as I possibly can. I try to see what are my proclivities, my biases that, limit me from attaining what I'm looking for, and maybe there's something in my surrounding too that makes it more difficult for me to attain these things. And it's not necessarily clear to me that it's one or the other, and maybe just a mishmash of different facets. And like I said, I don't know how wise it is for me to share this on the internet. Part of me is hoping to talk about some complex thoughts in my head, or at least what I think are complex thoughts, and trying to rationalize / conceptualize them through speech. And another part of me is hoping that if I am kind of, in a sense, self-harming myself by seeing the world in such a different light than it actually is, in a way, blaming the world for my problems and not looking enough into myself, I would hope that someone or a few people would be able to call me out adequately and help me find the path to truth, if you would. Despite this being a several year conundrum that I've been pondering and dealing with, it feels it's been a bit more prominent or saturated in the last few weeks for a plethora of different reasons, but it's been a bit more clear to me that there's a disconnect with my communication style with a lot of the people that surround me. Now, what I mean by that, I don't necessarily mean like the people around me are in the wrong, or I am in the wrong, or I'm in the right. There's just a disconnect there. And I've been trying really hard to think about these things and really try to understand them and see if there's anything that I could do to make it easier. May that be a change in approach or a change in mindset. And I would like to think that, still limited by my biases, I still think that maybe comparatively, not that I have an ease of seeing in an objective way, but I think, and maybe I can be proven wrong, but I think I can, I'm able to a certain extent to put my biases aside to try to be as close as I possibly could to objectivity, or to a third person perspective of objectivity. I don't know how redundant that sentence was, but we'll leave it in. I'll give a bit more context, or maybe elaborate a bit more on what I mean by the disconnect in communication. As that excerpt would suggest, first of all, I apologize. I understand that in a vacuum is maybe very broad or very abstract, and hopefully I could do a better job at elaborating what exactly I meant in that snippet of my long-running journal of woes through life. But if there's a place I could start with, it's definitely on what my aim is when I'm trying to communicate with people. I think if we're ever trying to have a conversation that involves the well-being of both parties, or all the parties involved, I think it's very important to take it as seriously as possible. And what I mean by seriously as possible is, I think it's very important for all parties to be to start off on the same page and be able to build off of that. I feel like oftentimes we are very quick to think we have an understanding of what the other person in front of us is saying, but are ignorant to how our biases paint what we hear. And if we approach our conversations like that, all we end up doing is, having two parallel conversations instead of having the exact same one. I feel like there's a lot of unnecessary misunderstandings. And I think maybe not the way to mitigate that, but a way that, I don't know how to not sound like a whiny child saying this, but I would want other people to approach these conversations is through the comfort of elaboration, the comfort of digging deeper when it's not obvious that it needs to be dug deeper. Because here's the thing, when you're having a conversation with another person, and it gets even more complex with the more people that are involved, but we'll try to keep it simple with just two people. There are several filters when it comes to communication. And I'm not talking about the filters of, can I say this to not offend it? Like, that aside, I think when we have a concept within our mind, it is very abstract. And it's not immediate what it actually is. It's very vague. And, assuming it's not only me, you've got a vague concept, and then when you're trying to express that concept, you're limited to your verbiage, to the vocabulary, And especially, let's say, in the English language, comparatively to other languages, there's not a lot of words that are very, very precise. So, but even that, even if you have the most precise type of language, I still think there's still a limit there, The whole picture paints 1,000 words type of dealio, except, I would even say that a concept itself or an idea is leagues more complex than a picture. So, yeah, we're limited to our vocabulary. And then another filter happens on the receiving end, where when you hear this watered down version of this concept happening in someone else's mind, your understanding of it is tainted with your own biases, especially if you're not aware of that and you think you're completely receptive. And then when it gets into your understanding, it's a failed game of telephone. And when that happens, and obviously you will not, I really have trouble believing that one person's conceptualization within their mind, first of all, is understood within themselves, and second of all, is appropriately, adequately transmitted to the other person. That happening to an 100% accuracy, that doesn't happen. That it would be very, very difficult to do so. But people don't seem to try to up that percentage of understanding, whether it be, I think most of the time is just ignorance. And I feel I'll make a little disclaimer in saying I feel like I'm going to use a lot of maybe stronger words than I actually mean. So when I say ignorance, I don't come from a mocking area. I use it in the most neutral way I possibly could, or maybe there's just a better word to use that I just don't know. But oftentimes people, they're unaware of their own biases and these filters and the watered down of a concept, that they'll go straight to, I heard it, I think I understand it, I understand it. And I think that's a dangerous thing, especially, again, this is in the context of having conversations that affect your interpersonal relationships, let alone political conversations. But I don't, at least at the moment, I don't care to have that conversation right now. But why it's dangerous to go straight to hearing and believing you understand what the other person's coming from without asking any further questions is because, like I said earlier, you guys are having a parallel discussion. It's going, relatively in the same direction. It's just you guys are not even talking about the same thing. Or even worse, if you think about it as an angle, even the slightest change of 3 degrees down the line will have acres upon kilometers of distance the more you get into it. And I think a way to mitigate that easy misunderstanding is by reducing yourself to your toddler self, that curious self that's just trying to discover the world, that's just trying to understand the world, by asking why. If someone says something and it shocks you, I think there's a plethora of different approaches, I think, that could happen after a situation like that. But I think two important ones are asking two things. Why did I react in this way? And why did this person say this? And each of those start in this, essentially a tree of depth, or a root system of depth. Because once you answer those questions, you then move on to the next. Why? 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 And that's what I mean by reverting to our toddler selves, and keep asking why until either you have a satisfactory enough answer, or until you can no longer answer at all. And obviously, we can have a conversation about what to do once you reach those dead ends, but I'll try to keep it as concise as I can. I feel like a lot of people don't do that. And that's good as a template, the asking why and trying to elaborate and trying to dig deeper. Another thing too is, if you're having a conversation with someone that you know or that have a close bond with, I think it's important to a certain extent, as long as you're being fair about it, is to allow yourself to make certain assumptions. And what I mean by that is, if you've known someone for like 5 years, let's say, and you've been close to them, and you've seen them through their ups and downs, and they've seen you through your ups and downs, and you've been there for each other, you've talked about a plethora of different things, you have a certain understanding of that person. And sometimes when they say something, you gotta paint, assuming that your understanding of them is at least slightly correct, you gotta paint whatever they say with that bias, or with that assumption, and with that understanding of that other person. Oftentimes, I feel as if I'll be talking to someone who's known me for a long time, and they know my values, they know where I stand on certain things. We've developed such a strong relationship and a camaraderie, an understanding. But the moment I say something that might allude to something that disrupts their own values, it almost feels like that entire image of me is completely shattered. And I don't think I'm the only one experiencing this. And it just makes me think, why are people so quick to come to that conclusion? If you have years of history, if you have years of understanding of being there for each other, maybe I'm gonna sound a bit more on the petty side when asking this rhetorical question, but why is it so hard to just take a second and think, okay, this person said something that on paper, on its own, is kind of problematic. Why did they say that? and oftentimes you do have the benefit of having the person in front of you, this person that you have a strong relationship with, you have the benefit of being able to ask them that. And because they're your friend, because they're close, the likelihood of it turning immediately sour is hopefully, assuming that the relationship is good, hopefully doesn't immediately turn into a proper fight or argument. If that's the case, and that's all it took for you guys to get into a proper fight through 5 years of strong bonds, then I believe that the bond was weak to begin with, shallow. But, trying not to digress too much, if people... Yeah, I find it discouraging that not a lot of people, at least again, it's in my experience, and maybe it's the people maybe it's the crowds that I end up with or that I choose that just have. It could be a communication style. It could be different values. It could be anything. Hopefully, if I am in the wrong, like I said, one of y'all are gonna tough love it onto me. But it does, at least in my personal experience, it does perplex me a bit. And kind of on the topic of trying to dig deeper and asking why, I've oftentimes been accused of being an overthinker in a very negative light. I might be delusional, but I do think that my overthinking, let's say, or if you want to paint it in a maybe more neutral light, my attention to detail, analytical approach, let's say, I feel like it's been more beneficial to me than it has been detrimental. And it confuses me, as well as kind of hurts me when people are very quick to fault me for it. Especially when they don't try to dig any deeper. And the moment I show signs of being someone who's an overthinker, I'm immediately thrown into a bin of, oh, this person is just a bundle of anxiety. Irrational anxiety, if I were to be more precise. I don't know if this needs to be said, but as a context, I think my overthinking is definitely more on a passive level. It's not something that I have to take a second to really think about. It's just, whenever I'm on a walk, whenever I'm taking a shower, whenever I'm playing a brain dead game, whenever I'm working, it's just something I passively think about. And maybe it'd be beneficial for me to give a more context on what that overthinking actually means. Essentially, whenever something happens, whenever something's said, I really want to figure out what that means. And I guess if you take it with the context of everything I've said in the last 26 minutes, or, I'll probably cut this up a little bit to take out the ums and likes and pauses of thinking, if you will. Well, let's round it down to maybe 24 minutes. It doesn't matter. I'll probably cut this out. But if you take the context of whatever I had said beforehand, I think in certain discussions it's very important to dig deeper so we really understand what we're talking about, and we really define exactly where our common ground is so we could build atop it. I am also very aware of the distinction in between what's the word? Like semantics. Focusing on the semantics. At least I would hope that I understand that. If not, then we know where the problem lies. But I understand that sometimes when you're trying to build up to an argument, there are certain things that don't necessarily need to be fully defined. You know, I'm not going to debate you whether or not a chair is a chair, depending on certain obscene criteria that don't matter to the discussion. Listen, if we're having a conversation about chairs, then yes, we're gonna dig deep. But if we're having a conversation about what it means to be sitting at a dining table, then we don't need to define the metaphysics of a chair or the meta understanding of a chair. But I do think that if we're trying to define, I guess, for the idea of what it means to what sitting at a dining table could allude to, yeah, we can dig into different places. Off the top of my head, I would probably dig towards what it means to eat in this common day and age, what it means to be seated, maybe surrounded by people, maybe surrounded by conversation, maybe the culture of sharing meals, depending, I could dig deep, only in the attempt of ensuring that we're talking about the same thing, or we're at least at the closest thing to a common understanding between each other. And I feel like people are very quick to label me as an overthinker. Stigma aside, overthinker is actually thinking about it, overthinking about it. Over does imply an imbalance and an excessiveness of it. But here I am talking about the semantics. But it does. It saddens me that there are people that don't take me seriously because I think this is important. And not only do I think subjectively it is important just for me, but I think I may be wrong on this, but I don't think I am. I think it's very important to break these things down, especially for things like political debates or I guess it's the most topical thing when it comes to political debate. When it comes to political debates, and governmental talk, finances, life-changing things, or life-affecting things, things that affect a vast, birth. I don't know if that's the right word, but what I mean is a vast net of people. I think it's super important to really flesh out the details so we really know what we're talking about. Oftentimes, and again, I don't want to get too much into it, but when it comes to political discourse, people are so quick to paint sides and to chastise and to, if you're not with us, you're against us. And that's always flabbergasted me. Or at least for the longest time I could or immediately remember, it's very much flabbergasted me, because now I start to think, like, if you're so sure about you being right, it's not obvious to me that there's actually a right worldview. And I think if you do think you have it right, it just rings out to me as very arrogant. And to me, this is basic philosophy. This is like the first thing they teach you in college about, Socrates saying, the only thing I don't know is that I don't, or the only thing I do know is that I don't know anything. And I don't want to just say some quote without putting too much weight onto it, but people forget that the world is complex. There's a lot of moving gears, and there's a lot of history behind it. There's a lot of moving pieces. And it seems to me that people are very, very, very quick to make conclusions off of such a shallow understanding. And why I feel comfortable saying shallow understanding is because when I try to have these conversations, and I guess that kind of alludes to that excerpt I read at the beginning, it's not obvious to me that people have really read up on whatever strengthened, or they haven't read up on the topic they have such a strong opinion on. And some people have, but they fall victim to reading up on only things that support your claim. Echo chambering. And that in itself, if you don't, on your research time, let's say, challenge your worldview, then the moment you step into the real world and someone actually does challenge that, and sure, you're going to have these assholes that are just going to be out for your throat, just the other side of the tribe war. If you go out to the real world and someone genuinely wants to have a conversation, productive conversation, and wants to just try to connect, because we're all just bundles of very unique build-ups of experiences. Every single day, a lot of things happen. And if you zoom out and look at a person and see it as, how a life's worth of experiences, I think it's worth having a genuine conversation to try to understand where they're coming from and how they got to that point. So when you go out into the real world bolstered by your echo chamber, sorry if it sounds a bit mocking, but I'll leave it at that for lack of better, compassionate terminology. And someone with genuine curiosity or genuine reaching out through of connection, let's say, the moment they challenge you, it's going to immediately seem like a threat. And all that other person is trying to do is just trying to understand your position and trying to dig deeper and trying to elaborate. But if you just surround yourself if you just read up on things that support your claim, then you won't be aware of the faults of your claim. And it just creates such prematurely ended conversations, unnecessarily sour conversations, because it's not clear to me that people are truly trying to understand the world. If anything, that approach speaks more towards just wanting to be right than trying to be good. And my frustrations or my woes of recency kind of tie into that. I feel like people are not necessarily attuned to trying to understand the people around them and acknowledging the complex uniqueness of the people around them. We are so quick to make saturated assumptions that we end up talking, but nothing's being registered. And all we end up doing is creating enemies within ourselves. I realize it's kind of sounding a bit more motivational bullshittery. I'm not trying to do that. I'm off script. I don't have a script. I'm really speaking from my mind. Really just letting out, venting. I also don't know if this is going to be posted. Like I said at the beginning, I don't know how wise it would be for me to post this. But at the very least, it feels like it was kind of good for me to just talk into a mic in front of a camera and just let my mind go without any barriers. But alas, I will make sure to tie up as much as I possibly can, despite all of the open threads I've left in this conversation thus far. But only a few, because another thing is that people seem to have, for lack of better terms, a fear of having long-winded discussion. I think we want the answer so quickly, but sometimes an understanding can take years of nigh constant conversation, let's say. And this definitely applies to this, I guess I can't really call it a conversation, but I guess monologue or soliloquy for all you theatrics out there. I think this is definitely an ongoing discussion. For one, for two reasons, maybe a third if I can think of one while I'm saying these, but the two main reasons being, I feel like I could say so much more about these things. And two, I think I don't understand, or I don't have the full understanding of what this discussion actually means. So, I don't know how often I'll be doing episodes like this, where it's just nice and intimate in between you and I. Sorry about that. But if I do end up doing this on a at least semi-regular basis, I'll try my hardest to very much elaborate on this topic so we can come to with some modifications if you know, if you 6 viewers out there decide to send some comments my way telling me I'm wrong, you know, we can have a discussion in some way like that. And you know, maybe we can develop this idea, this discussion, into something that's very, very fruitful. But for now, I apologize for probably leaving a lot of threads open, especially some that I might have been able to close. But if you stuck through the ramblings of a madman, I appreciate it. I thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I want to apologize too for my awkwardness. for speaking to a camera and a mic all by my lonesome. It's not the most natural to me, let's say. I definitely do a bit better through interpersonal conversation. But again, if I end up doing more of this, hopefully I get a bit better with it. So for now, thank you for watching an episode of Late Night Talks with Jay from the Jelly Podcast. And I hope that anything I said has some resonance within at least someone out there. And hopefully, in the same way, I would hope that someone out there also feels understood through this discussion. Monologue. Thanks. See you next time.